using like hosting one of these?
Yeah, I'm glad you're
Okay.
doing it because I don't
All
know
right, we're
what's
live
going on.
now. So me and Greg were just having a wee chat about family there before we begin. So good day, everybody, wherever you are in the world. I'll just briefly run over the topics we're going to cover today. So we're going to be talking about 2023 so far. Obviously, we just want to do the highlights. Otherwise we'll be here forever. But we'll be talking about. We're going to start just from basically the big controversy at the start of the year, which was Velma. We'll also be talking about the MCU, the impact of the Mario Brothers movie, the Harry Potter franchise, the current state of Star Wars and Lucasfilm, and some other topics. It's all there in the description if you want to have a look at what we're going to be going over, and we're just going to go over it in that order that you see in the description. So, yeah, Greg, before we get started, I just wanted to talk about your channel a little bit because you've done some terrific stuff. You did a great video about women in the MCU. You said that one of the main problems is that women in the MCU are basically depicted as men living out a power fantasy, a male power fantasy. Can you talk about that a bit? Because I thought that was really interesting.
Well, yeah, I don't know why, but it just occurred to me one day that basically there's two reasons that these female superheroes are not connecting with the female audience that they are marketing them to. One, because women just don't have the same fantasies as the rest of us. I know you wanted to talk about like John Wick and stuff. I hadn't seen any of those, so I started watching the John Wick movies with my wife, and we had a totally different reaction to those movies. Like I was like, yes, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And she was like, it's interesting visually, but this is not doing anything for me. So, men and women are just different, despite what a lot of people are trying. They want to push this idea that we're all the same. And then I also realized that a lot of these new female superheroes they are men. I mean, they act like men. They're tough like men. Like they're all the male stereotypes that we see in superheroes. But then they just cast women and they were like, cool, we did it. Look at how great we are. And it's like, now you still wrote men. And that's the second reason that women don't want to watch this stuff. They don't want to see lady men. They want to see men if they want to see men. It's different.
The other strange thing I find about these female male characters, basically women playing men, like for example Rey in Star Wars, they're kind of men, but they're like men that have been castrated. They're completely asexual. So Lucasfilm is particularly guilty of this. It wasn't as bad in the MCU until recently, but a lot of these female superheroes, they're completely sexless. There's no sense of them as sexual beings. They're like these weird amorphous male-female creatures that are massively overpowered. It's really weird. It's when you actually think about it, it's utterly strange seeing it on screen.
It is, and I think it's good to delve into that. And I know you're going to do some videos. I want to do some videos on this where they want to pretend like people are that independent, sexless, superhero. But the audience watching, I think a lot of people don't even realize why they're not connecting with that. But you're exactly right. We're watching this stuff and something in your subconscious is like, I'm not connecting with this character and I don't know why. And I think that's why it is, because none of us are that hyper independent person. All of us seek, almost 99% of people are seeking after that relationship, be it a friendship or a sexual relationship or something. Like we're all trying to get to that. And so we relate to that pursuit. So when you see a hero that is not after that in any way, something in your brain is just like, I'm not making the connection here. And I think you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah. So let's move on to our first topic, which is everybody's favorite show, Velma.
So it's my favorite. It got me monetized. I love Mindy Kaling. I feel like I owe her a thank you or something for making that terrible show.
That's when I came across your channel because you had this massive big video. That's actually got more views than any of my videos. The video you did on Velma, which was really good. I did some videos on Velma and that influenced the way I was thinking about it, particularly your points about them trying to be subversive. Yeah. I could see the subversive stuff because Disney and especially Lucasfilm, they've done all that crap in the Star Wars movie where they've tried to be subversive and cool. And it's become such a cliche trope, such a nasty, dull cliche trope trying to be subversive. And in the case of Velma, it was Daphne being a drug dealer, which was a thing for 5 minutes. And then the story forgot that happened and went with something else. It was awful.
Right. They didn't know where they wanted to go, but they just thought that sounds cool. Let's do that.
Yeah, it was just awful. And the way you put it was really good. It was just a bunch of people in a room with 3 words on the wall: subversive, edgy, and what was it? Meta. Meta was the other one.
Yeah. And that's everybody wants to do that now.
I quite like meta elements, but it's been very poorly used. And I would almost say that the way millennials and Gen Xers are using it, it's really bad. But if you go back and you look at how it was done in the past properly, and I'll give examples of this. You look at David Lynch. David Lynch really knows how to do meta. For example, on Twin Peaks, people wonder what, like, if you look at the Red Rooms, there's scenes where Laura Palmer she's got these flashing lights on her face, and you don't know what it is, and she's laughing. And I think that is a TV showing Laura Palmer that she is the fix for this throwaway victim.
Yeah,
and that's going to fix TV, and it's going to bring back balance to what TV had become in the 80s, which was basically the victim of the week. Like, you're not really caring about these dead people; they're just there so the detective can do his thing. And that was meta. That was really cool. Like, Lynch understood meta. There's even elements of meta in Star Wars, but what they actually in the modern sense of meta, it's just become cheesy, cheap, throwaway humor in which it's not subtle, it's not subtextual, and it's not symbolic. It's just, this is a TV show, haha.
Yeah, well, and you're absolutely right. Like, what you brought up with the Twin Peaks thing, that's great because it's sort of letting you know that they know. But the modern way they're doing it, they're winking at the camera constantly, and it's it's so overdone. Like, we get it. We know you're watching a show. We know you're making a show, but you can't just observe that like they did in Velma. You can't just say in a TV show we would be doing this and then wink at the camera. That's not a joke. That's just an observation. I mean, to me, that's on the same level of like when stand-up comedians just it's really cool to hate Donald Trump in this country. So, you see stand-up comedians just go, man, that Donald Trump, he sucks. And the audience claps. And it's like, but that's not a joke. That's not funny. That got some reaction, but that's not comedy. And it was the exact same thing with Velma. Like, they wanted to be Rick and Morty so badly, but they don't understand why people enjoy that show. And all they could do was try to clone it, and it worked well. And we see how well. It's the lowest rated show in IMDb history, I think. And
yeah. Everybody hated it. I thought it was beautiful because the leftists on Twitter and in other places around the internet, some of them were genuinely convinced that it was a psyop, that it was a really bad show that was intentionally terrible in order to make the left look like basically genocidal psychopaths.
Yeah. And I mean, if you didn't know anything about Mindy Kaling, then you might be able to buy that. But unless her entire career has been this, slow burn mole hiding in the bushes, waiting for this moment to pounce on the left, which I have a really hard time believing. No, there was no way. She just really was that dumb and really thought that it was going to be funny.
Yeah. And the other weird thing as well, they thought they were being very clever with their deconstruction of tropes. And they had these really odd, weird, old-fashioned culture references, like Velma saying something like, I want a hot detective in here who I will infuriate with my indifference. And if it ever was a trope, it's very, very old. And sometimes they just made up tropes like lesbian cops can't do their jobs. I don't even know if that was ever a thing. I doubt it. But
yeah, I don't know what that was even referencing.
They seem to be very disengaged from culture. Like the people who are making this, they're trying to be culturally referential, but they don't have any connection with culture. They don't understand modern culture. And in order to be meta and in order to be subversive and interesting and satirical, you really need to understand culture at a grassroots level. You need to understand basically what you would today might call meme culture.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Well, and then the problem is these shows take a long time. And, right now with online culture, everything moves really quickly. So a joke that was funny when that show was written is no longer funny at all. And that's why some of that stuff feels so outdated. Like, and I think also a lot of it is that you do have people that are disconnected from the rest of the country, from reality. You have these writers just living in LA. They're telling each other the exact same jokes. And so, they were like, hey, let's write Fred and let's make a bunch of small dick jokes. And that's going to be hilarious. And I guess they all agreed that was going to be super funny. And it wasn't even funny the first time. And then by the 17th time, I mean, it was just sad.
It was more than sad, though. It was vaguely psychotic because, I mean, I made this point in a video I did on it. It's a double standard. The idea that you are going to make fun of the genitalia of a teenage boy, which is utterly sick, you know, because there are obviously teenage boys who are obviously sensitive about the size of their penis. That's a common thing at that age. And then you've got this TV show making fun of that. And that's vaguely psychotic. That's just crazy stuff. But if you did that to a girl, if this was a TV show making fun of, for example, the size of a teenage girl's breasts, cancellations, heads have to roll, scalps need to be given to the mob.
Yeah. Well, and there was a lot of psychotic stuff. Like, I watched the first 2 episodes when it came out, and it was enough for me. I made the video, and then I didn't want anything else to do with it. So I don't know how much you watched of it, but I do know in that
the entire season. It was one of the hardest watches I've ever done. And do you know what the thing is? Like, because I watched the entire season, because I made a video called "I Can Fix Velma," which was my proposal for season 2 of Velma.
Yeah. And
so I had to watch the whole thing, and it's just it's soul crushingly boring. It is just the emotion that it elicits in the viewer overwhelmingly, more than anything else. Yes, it elicits disgust and hatred, but honestly, it's just so boring. It's an awful, awful, awful show.
Well, in the second, I remember in the second episode or first episode or something, they talked about Fred not going through puberty, and he was like, "That's why I have these boyish good looks, because I'm prepubescent." And like you talk about psychotic writing, who wrote that? What pedophile wrote that into that show, saying that he was good looking because he was boyish and prepubescent and had smooth legs and all that? Like, there was so much going on with that show. Oh, the girls in the shower. Like, what was this thing with naked teenagers? Like,
it's almost like that, like weird kinds of Japanese porn that depict like kids and teenagers in sexual situations, and it's just really, really twisted. It was borderline that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It was. I was grossed out right from the start. I mean, it was the most low-hanging fruit humor. I mean, it felt like you got a bunch of 12-year-old boys in a room and you were like, "Guys, what are the funniest jokes? What are the sickest burns you can think of?" And they were like, "Dude, what would be funny is let's open up with a bunch of girls in the shower in the girls' locker room. That would be awesome. And the guy we don't like, he's got a small penis." And like, I mean, these are all the jokes that I told when I was 12 years old. That's what it felt like. And yet grown adults and HBO greenlit this. Millions of dollars were spent. And that's the other weird thing, is that somewhere along the line, somebody at HBO had to preview this. And nobody saw that and thought, maybe we should. I mean, at least the Marvels got reshoots and rewrites and stuff. Nobody pumped the brakes on this show at all.
Yeah, that was something that I addressed in my video. And it's funny you should say that about the 2 12-year-old boys, because a point I made when I was doing a video on Velma is I actually had this little skit where it's 2 14-year-old stoners from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and they're on the phone to each other. And I've changed their voice so that they're basically plotting out Velma, because that's what it is. It's 2 stoner kids making a show. It's horrific.
I mean,
it's the other thing you said about how could this happen today. I actually have a word for this. I call it Sovietization, because the Soviet Union the Soviet Union produced one great work of art that I'm aware of, which was their adaptation of Lord of the Rings, which I would call an anti-film masterpiece. Have you seen it?
No, I have not.
It's one of the great trash movies. Came out it was thought to be lost, but it was rediscovered last year and it came out on YouTube. It's truly something.
It's
the best thing the Soviet Union ever did. I think it was made like in the last year of the Soviet Union. You could probably make a great movie just about that, just about a bunch of Soviet actors making an adaptation of The Lord of the Rings in the dying days of the Soviet Union. That'd be a great movie. But the adaptation is just one of the weirdest things you'll ever see. It's profoundly unwatchable. I love it. But apart from that, the Soviet Union did nothing but shite. And one of the reasons was because all of the art that they did had to be politically informed. If it wasn't politically informed, the attitude of the Soviet authorities and of Soviet culture and of the mindset that you were required to adopt by the Soviet elites was that it was bourgeois. meaning that it was non-political and it was entirely decadent, and it existed merely for the pleasure of middle-class people with too much leisure on their hands. Yeah. And if it was true art, then it would represent the struggle of the people. And this was what happened to Soviet art. I mean, you look at the 19th century, you've got Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and later on Chekhov. You've got all these great writers. Probably Russia produced the greatest literature of the 20th century. Some people would say Great Britain. Great Britain basically produced the 19th century equivalent of giant soap operas and sob stories in the form of Dickens, which is good stuff. It's good. But the really great stuff comes from Russia in the 19th century. What happened to that culture? That entire culture was exterminated, wiped out, and it was replaced with the Soviet culture, and it sucked, and Russia has been crap ever since in terms of the culture. And the same thing has happened with Hollywood. People are in these writers' rooms, they're in these studios, and they can't dissent. When it comes to something like Velma, you can't turn around and say, this is sick, I don't want to be a part of this. This is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, or this is a bad idea. When someone comes along and says, hey, let's have Lizzo in a Mandalorian episode, you're not allowed to turn around and say, no, Lizzo's a moron and she can't act, and it's going to look ridiculous if we have her in this episode, because you'll lose your job. Her diversity score is far too high. All right.
I saw that today. Oh, God.
Sorry, man.
Oh, I wasn't going to watch it, and I watched it just for this. And it was a job to get through that. But no, you're absolutely right. Like, you can only, I mean, you know, in most of Hollywood, you can only make jokes against, you know, conservatives or Republicans. You know, they made so many jokes about Donald Trump. And I didn't even vote for the guy. Like, I don't love him, but I got tired of hearing jokes about him. Like, we were beating a dead horse at that point. But that's the only jokes they're allowed to make. And I think you're absolutely right that it has to fit in one box. That's why Fred was allowed to be made fun of. You know, that's why you had to have Daphne and Velma be lesbians. You know, all that stuff is basically required at this point. And even if it's played out and it's not funny and nobody even wants to watch it, it has to be in the show. Just like Lizzo, you have to. Otherwise, you know, your show is too white, your show is too male, or whatever. So all of the stuff has to be crammed in, whether it makes sense or not. And then you have an unfunny, unwatchable show. And then all that's left is for them to blame the fans because it's our fault that the show failed every time.
Yeah.
Like, it's our tastes are just wrong. That's what it is.
Yeah, we're just not as enlightened as Mindy Kaling and her ilk.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to our next topic, which will be, we're going to talk a little bit about the Oscars and compare that with back when movies were actually good. But before we do, we'll just check in with the chat. We have the Angry Bootneck in here, who is a friend of mine who I've done a live chat with. So, Bootneck, thanks for coming into the chat. And he says he's off to watch the Soviet Lord of the Rings. Bootneck, you're going to have a good time for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then you're going to think, did I die and go to some sort of purgatory? Because it's that strange. It's almost like something that couldn't even exist. It's brilliant, though. It's wonderful stuff. It's far better than anything that Hollywood has produced recently. It beats the hell out of Rings of Power. I mean, I'd rather watch that than Rings of Power.
Well, it sounds like it's in the same class where the title says Lord of the Rings, but then what's inside of it has nothing to do with Lord of the Rings whatsoever. So in that way, they're very alike.
I think it's improv. You know, I think a lot of the time, I think they're drunk. The actors are drunk a lot of the time, and they're standing around these cheesy sets and these ridiculous costumes, just talking endlessly. It's really good, but I'm pretty sure that the ones that did remember their lines, they're massively outnumbered by the people who are just in there drunk talking nonsense and not even attempting to put on a voice. Like Frodo is just a Russian guy that sounds like he's drank too much vodka. It's brilliant.
I'm excited to watch it. I've got a buddy of mine that we get together and we watch terrible movies together, and I think that's going to have to go on the list. We watched all the Machete movies. There was a movie called Rubber about a tire that blew people's heads up. All kind of terrible movies we watched together, and I think Russian Lord of the Rings has got to be next.
Yeah, definitely. Just checking in with the chat. Charles Emerson Winchester III has just contributed $10. So thank you very much, Charles Emerson Winchester III. I want to get that name right, so thank you. Guy Gadbois says, if Liz was portraying Galadriel now, I think I know how that horse died on set. I think that might be what it is. I don't know. I would actually rather that Lizzo portrayed Galadriel I think they should just go all in with it for Rings of Power season 2 because they said it's just all female directors now. So do it, man. Get Lizzo in to play Galadriel and turn Sauron into like a trans pansexual or something like that. It'll be great. It'll be great.
Maybe
Watch
play
my
Amy Schumer or something.
Yep.
It'd be great.
I did I Can Fix Rings of Power 2. And Sauron goes on an arc because their Sauron was not bad, but he kind of sucked. He's not ready to conquer Middle Earth yet. He's not alpha Chad enough. So I had him binge watch like Andrew Tate videos on YouTube, and that's going to pump him up and get him into that sort of conqueror mindset to go and conquer Middle Earth. So that's what we need.
Tries to recruit Galadriel to be on his webcam business.
Yeah. Amazon need to adopt my version of Rings of Power season 2. Only I can save the show at this stage. All right. So our next topic here, we're going to talk a little bit about the Oscars. So we're not talking about the ceremony itself because I don't think anyone watches that anymore. But we're just going to talk about one. Yeah, no. Even if you paid me, it would depend on how much you paid me, like to watch that thing. But let's just focus on the best movie category because I think this is very telling. So here were the nominations for best movie. This was, and I actually agree with this. I think this basically was a list of more. There were a couple of things missing, but they did a fairly good job of listing the 10 best movies of the year. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, All Quiet on the Western Front, Avatar, The Way of Water, The Banshees of Inisherin, Elvis, The Fabelmans, Tar, Top Gun Maverick, Triangle of Sadness, Women Talking. That's the best they could do. And you might think that's not bad. You might think that's not a bad list of movies. They're okay. But okay, let's bring in a frame of reference for that. So here I picked a random year from the 90s, 1997, and I just said, okay, 1997 movies, Google, what have you got for me? This is what came up. So here's a list of movies from 1997. Men in Black, Gattaca, the Jeremy Irons Lolita adaptation, Life is Beautiful, Good Will Hunting, Contact, Event Horizon, Cube, Starship Troopers, Face Off, Liar Liar, LA Confidential, Con Air, Titanic, The Fifth Element, Boogie Nights, As Good as It Gets. So you compare 2022 to 1997 and you realize just how dead Hollywood is.
Well, you know, what's interesting is not just because they're older movies, but even at that time, I watched all those movies because they were good movies. I watched Starship Troopers. I watched Event Horizon, even though I was probably too young for any of that stuff. But, you know, I watched those because they were great movies at the time. I think a lot of people watched them. I think right now, if you ask anybody, hey, did you go see The Fabelmans? They're like, is that a show? Is that on Netflix? What is that? You know, what's Women Talking? Nobody spoke about that movie. I didn't even know that was a movie until you told me we were going to talk about the Oscars Best Picture, and I looked up what they were. I haven't heard of 70% of these movies because they were nowhere. They're terrible.
Yeah.
Nobody cared about them.
Yeah, like, I mean, I've seen 7 of them. I haven't seen and will never watch Women Talking. That was honestly, that was a political pick because it's a bunch of women talking about how their husbands raped them or something. But honestly, none of these movies are great. Some of them are good. I think Top Gun Maverick is very good. All Quiet on the Western Front is also very good, and The Banshees of Inisherin is good. Elvis is very serviceable. It fits quite nicely into that mold of biopic adaptations where it's basically just the highlights of someone's life, and it's all strung together in a really nice, big, flashy movie with all the bells and whistles and big songs. It's nothing special. You've seen it before. It's done better though. Like it's not as bad as Bohemian Rhapsody. Bohemian Rhapsody, I think, is really crap and massively overrated. And I hate what they did to Freddie Mercury. I thought they really did him dirty in that movie. But it's good. It's basically a good version of the very generic start to finish Wikipedia page best of biopic adaptation. It's a good version of that because they're usually terrible. So I'll give it credit for that. But it's nothing special. None of these movies are anything special. The one that everyone was talking about, Everything Everywhere All at Once, I didn't really like. I think that it hinted at stuff that could have been really great, and it started the main villain in that, Jobu Tabaki, I think she's called. Have you seen that movie, by the way, Greg?
I have not. I haven't
well,
seen
you're not
any
missing
of
that
these yet.
much. They start out with this villain, and it shows great promise. She's basically a super nihilist, and it's really interesting. But it just collapses. It becomes really dull in the end, and I hated the ending. There are things that are good about that movie, but there's so much that's wrong with it.
Yeah, it looked flashy, and everybody was talking about it. It's been on my to-do list for a long time, but just hasn't been enough of a draw to
No,
actually
I mean
watch
it's a
it.
good movie. It's good, but it's also disappointing, and I think it didn't really live up to the potential that it suggested in the first act.
Yeah.
It
Well,
got
but
brilliant
to
at
your
one
point, if that's the one that won and it's an okay movie, what does that say about the rest of it? Where your number one best movie of the year was, yeah, it was pretty good, but there were a few spots I didn't like. Whereas in years past, it was pretty clear, or if it wasn't clear, it was because there were 2 or 3 really amazing movies, and it was difficult to pick between them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It actually did deserve to win the Oscar because it is the best movie there. It's just it's just Drac, man. And a lot of those are foreign movies. Like Hollywood is struggling to produce. I mean, one thing I will give the Academy credit for is they're able to recognize the fact that Hollywood movies suck because Everything Everywhere All at Once is that's a dual production with Hong Kong studio. All Quiet on the Western Front is German. Banshees of Inisherin is Irish. And a couple of other these, I think, a couple of them are European. Women Talking, Triangle of Sadness. So, like most of those aren't even Hollywood anymore because they're just not making good movies. It's just trash now.
Yeah. Well, they're out of ideas, and like we talked about, all they can do is continue to repeat whatever the current political slogan is. So they're going to put, if Me Too is popular, that's what the movie they're going to make. If BLM is popular, that's the movie they're going to make. If it's an election year and we're going up against, whoever the Republican is, that's the bad guy in every single movie. Last year, a lot of the Hollywood movies were, you had Glass Onion, rich people bad. You had The Menu, rich people bad. That's the new thing. Elon Musk is the enemy right now. So all of the villains are rich white guys. That's all they know how to do. And after you see it so many times, you're right. It all, somebody said it all blends together like gray sludge. And they're absolutely right because it's all really the same movie. The actors might change, but it's all the same storyline.
Yeah, and even has the same characters. For example, in the last video I did, which was about Ant-Man, I made the point that Ant-Man's daughter in that movie, she is just another iteration of the Mary Sue character.
Oh, yeah.
And you've seen this same character, Mulan, Rey from Star Wars, Riri, now Ant-Man's daughter, and Captain Marvel, and other ones that I've forgotten, Galadriel from Rings of Power. It's the same character.
Because they all blend together. You can't remember them.
Yeah, it's just grey sludge. Like peak Aussie man in the chat there said it right. It's grey sludge. It's just all these characters that blend together, and they're all Mary Sue, and they're all the exact same character. They're all asexual. Right? They don't have love interests because they don't need them, man. Right? They're all overpowered. They're all nasty and bitchy and prickly, and they're unreasonable and not willing to negotiate, and they have to have it their way, and they're all super geniuses, and it's just pathetic. It's so lowbrow that it's condescending. It's a total lack of respect for the audience's intelligence.
Yeah, well, I watched your video about movies having to make sense, not necessarily be realistic. They just have to make sense, and I loved every point you were making because that is the big problem. Where since they're so independent, since they're so, they're better than everybody all the time, generally that only works because of ridiculous plot devices or the rules get switched up mid-movie to make them the winner every time. And you nailed it. That was, I had watched that and then I finished up the rest of The Mandalorian. And as I was watching the last few episodes, I was realizing you were right. There were so many things in the last few episodes of The Mandalorian that don't agree with the first few episodes of this season. Because when the rules need to change, they just change them on the fly. And that's why so many of these are terrible. They don't make sense in their own world.
Yeah, exactly. And with The Mandalorian, I just lost count. I couldn't finish the full season. I watched up to the Lizzo episode, which I still haven't finished. And
Wait, you didn't finish the season?
Almost finished the season. I've watched the first 6 or 7 episodes.
Oh.
But there's so many plot holes, and not just plot holes, but plot contrivances and the scene logistics. My God, the scene logistics are they're so bad. For example, there's a scene where Baby Yoda is having a little sparring session with one of the mini Mandalorians, the Mandalorian kids.
How terrible does he look, by the way? He looks like he's on strings, right? He just is.
The string work, the wire work is awful. It's terrible.
I'm sorry. He was facing off with the other. Is this the dart scene?
Yeah, the dart scene. So he's facing off doing a little sparring session with darts with this kid. And so the sparring session finishes, and Baby Yoda has his moment with the ridiculous backflip. And then a very, very bored Pedro Pascal makes an utterly forgettable comment, something like, "Nice job, kid." And he just sounds like someone who doesn't want to be there. He's like, "Fuck this. I'm done with this stupid show. I want to get out of this ridiculous action figure suit and go act."
What I heard was I heard he really wasn't around much because he was shooting Last of Us. So I heard they kind of had to work around the fact that he wasn't even there that much. And so, yeah, I bet when he did have a day to get into the recording studio, he was just like, "Okay, good job, kid. Nice flying. This is what a map looks like. I got to go. I'm back. I got to get back to the other studio."
Not bad. Like, he's terrible on the show because he just doesn't care anymore. And he's a brilliant actor. He was great in The Last of Us, but he sucked in The Mandalorian. And look, he gives the show what the show deserves. No effort. And anyway, after this little scene with Grogu and Dart Boy, about once Pedro Pascal has finished delivering his bored lines, right then a giant pterodactyl flies over the mountains and begins the attack. But it was very nice of the pterodactyl to wait until the scene was finished and until it had cadenced. So once the scene has finished and cadenced off nicely, then and only then does the pterodactyl attack. So the next scene can happen. Just garbage scene logistics like that, plot contrivances like the Mandalorian flies off a planet, and wouldn't you know it, he flies into the exact location of the pirate ship out of the billions of miles of space. That's where he happens to fly to. And
all the ships hover just above atmosphere. It's incredible how close they are that they're able to leave atmosphere, and then they're the ships. It's amazing. Yeah, they don't stay in space. They stay almost right on top of it every time.
And Din Djarin and the Woman DeLorean, when they're flying off at the end of an episode, that episode hasn't had enough action yet, and Disney Analytics says they need a battle, so TIE fighters conveniently appear out of nowhere. And in order to explain this, the Woman DeLorean says, "Oh, the Empire have been hunting me." That's it. That's the explanation. Yeah. There you go.
So in the final episode, the pterodactyl comes down, right? And they try to chase after it, and they can't because their jetpacks run out of fuel. Right. So this is one of those things where you were talking about, like, it doesn't make any sense. Right. So they do that. They explain that their jetpacks only have so much fuel. Okay, that's perfectly fine. That provides the excuse for them to make camp, and they have to climb up the mountain, and it just pads the episode up. This entire season, it should have been 2 episodes, but they needed 8 apparently. Well, in the 8th episode, they are going to go take back Mandalore. I hate to spoil it, but I'm honestly not spoiling much. You could have seen this from the first episode. They get ambushed, and there's that cloud around the planet, so you can't send comms up through the cloud. So she tells one of the guys, they're in a cave. She says, "I need you to fly through that crack in the cave and fly up and warn the others." So they're underground. He takes off in the jetpack up through the cave, up through the atmosphere, through the thunderstorm cloud, all the way into outer space on this same pack of jet fuel that earlier in the season we were told couldn't get those guys. I mean, how far away from that cave were they when they ran out of jetpack fuel, and they couldn't chase down the pterodactyl? It wasn't that far, and yet 6 episodes later, we have a guy shooting all the way up through the atmosphere, all the way to outer space, into the ship that's waiting up there to warn them all. And it's little stuff like that you're like, it doesn't make any sense. And if you hadn't explained the stupid jetpack fuel thing earlier, then I wouldn't have noticed it. But you took the time to tell me that they only have so much fuel. That was a plot point. But then later, when you didn't need it to be a plot point, it didn't matter anymore.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the part where, because I've looked at a lot of the reviews online, a lot of the audience reaction and people writing the reviews on Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, and basically I think that they've lost their audience, Lucasfilm. If you look at the ratings for The Mandalorian, they've completely crashed. And I think the scene where basically everybody checked out was when the Mandalorian shows up. Din Djarin shows up with Baby Yoda at the start in episode 1. A lot of people looked at that and just thought, "Fuck this, I'm out. No way. I can't do this anymore," because they, at the end of season 2, Luke came to rescue them, and then Luke disappeared with Baby Yoda. Then in Boba Fett, the Boba Fett show, Luke trains Baby Yoda and then gives him back to the Mandalorian, I think. And nobody saw that because the show was terrible.
Right.
And
I didn't see
so
it.
they had no idea.
I watched the first 2 episodes of Boba Fett. That's all I had time for. After that, I was so bored. I couldn't finish it.
Yeah. So at the start of season 3 in The Mandalorian, when Din Djarin shows up with Baby Yoda again, everybody's just like, "What? What the hell's going on here?" And that you've seen that repeatedly in the comments in Metacritic and then Rotten Tomatoes. A lot of people were like, "Why isn't Baby Yoda with Luke? Where is Luke? I thought he gave him to Luke." And they were angry about this, and it broke believability, and it took them out of the show because it destroyed immersion. If you destroy immersion, people just they're not immersed in it. They're not committed to the show anymore, and they just stop watching. That's how they lost their audience in episode 1.
It was so obvious they just wanted to sell more of those plushies and dolls, and they thought, well, people liked him because he was cute, so we're going to bring him back. That first episode, when Grogu shows up, I thought, okay, here we go again. And then the other thing that bothered me, one episode, so I would not have finished this season if I didn't, I knew we were going to talk about it tonight, so I was like, I'm going to power through this. I'm going to get through this whole season. But I would have stopped watching easily episode 1 or 2, definitely episode 3, which was an hour long of scientist Pershing thinking he trusts somebody and then he's betrayed. Like, that was an hour. It took me 2 days to watch that episode because halfway through I was like, where is this going? I paused it to see how much time was left. I still had a half an hour of the show left, and I was like, I can't do this today. I have to take a break from this. But right out of the gate in the first episode, they're just, all they have is callbacks. He's walking down the street and he looks up in the tree and there's those little monkey looking creatures. And it's just Lucasfilm going, hey, you remember these things? You saw them in the bar at Cantina, or the Cantina. Remember seeing these little guys? Later on in the season, he picks up a R5 unit with the red stripes. That's the one that Luke almost bought back in episode 4, A New Hope. Like, they're constantly just going, hey, remember this thing? Remember this thing? Look, doesn't this look familiar? Look, you've seen this before. None of it is a story. And in the first season, that was cool. I love the nostalgia. I love the callbacks and the Easter eggs. But by season 3, you need to have something more than just, hey, remember this? Because that's not a story anymore. And you've had 2 seasons to get people interested, and all they have is just nostalgia. That's it. Yeah.
Well, moving on from The Mandalorian, because we do have a lot to cover here. We'll move on with the just Lucasfilm and the state of Star Wars currently. So basically, Star Wars is dead, right? As a franchise. I made a video 9 months, I think 8 or 9 months ago, called Star Wars is a Dying Franchise. And I didn't mean creatively dead. To me, it was already dead creatively and artistically at that stage. I was talking about specifically as a franchise that is capable of making money and eliciting interest and creating new fans. It was dying 9 months ago. That was after Obi-Wan, and I thought, okay, this thing is on its last legs. Mandalorian season 3 comes out. Andor actually came out and wasn't too bad, and then flopped. And then Mando season 3 killed it. Stone cold dead. And I mean, as a franchise, it's no longer commercially viable. For example, if I was the head of Amazon Studio, or if I was the head of Apple Plus Studio, because Apple are really up in their game in streaming and movies. They're going to invest. I think the number that I read was that Apple are going to invest $5 billion this year. They're also buying some theaters. I forget which ones, but they're looking to buy about 700 theaters in the US, maybe more. But Apple are making some really big moves. And if I was an Apple and someone raised the possibility of buying Lucasfilm, I would be like, well, no. Right. Star Wars isn't worth anything anymore. Like, what do you think? Do you think there's still some intrinsic value, or is Star Wars just a dead franchise at this stage?
I think the only way that they can get value back is they need to get away from this, whatever, is it a 60-year period from the prequel trilogy to the most recent sequel trilogy? That period of time, that needs to be done. There needs to be no more stories about anybody named Skywalker, anybody named Palpatine, anybody that we have seen for the last couple of decades. They need to just let that be done. Star Wars has an entire library of canon. There are video game tie-ins. There was Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, which I love both of those. That was, I believe those are set like 1,000 years pre-Star Wars. The Old Republic, the old this like utopian time where the Jedi were ruling everything and everything was amazing, and this is before the Empire and this ancient war with the Sith. Like, there are all these really cool things that they could be doing, and they consistently want to tell stories from this little 60-year time period between Phantom Menace and Rise of Skywalker. Everything they want to talk about is right in there, and everybody's so tired of it. I don't want to hear about Han Solo anymore. I don't want to hear about Luke. I don't even care about the Mandalorian anymore. As cool as I thought they were going to be, we saw a couple of seasons. That's great. This is supposedly an entire galaxy worth of species and stories, and yet we can't get out of this tiny little window. And that's the only way I think they have any value left. But then they announced they're going to talk more about Rey, so shoots that in the foot.
That was one of the topics that we're going to discuss. So the Rey, but before we get on to Rey, I just did want to say that Disney made that decision at the very start when they purchased Lucasfilm. They threw out the extended universe, and to put that just into context as to what a bad decision that was, that has over 20,000 characters. You were mentioning it has a lot of video games, has a lot of novels. They just tossed it all out, and that was unbelievably stupid. All they had to do was follow the Marvel model. Marvel got successful by doing good adaptations of comic books. Of the thousands of comic books that existed, they just picked the ones that were popular and people liked, and had basically been reviewed, had been pre-selected by the fan base, by millions of fans, and thought, okay, well, let's adopt these movies. If someone competent had been hired as the head of Lucasfilm, that's what they would have done. They would have just gone to the EU, the extended universe, and adopted the quality stories from there into TV shows and movies, and they would have had a lot of success. Yeah.
Well, and you bring up a good point that it's amazing that these people, they don't have to guess at what is successful, and yet they miss the mark. I don't read a lot of comics, but I watch Eric July or Young Ripa on this channel or on this platform, and he loves comics, and he points out time and time again that the last 10 years they've been trying to sell these comics from Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan, and they don't sell. Nobody's buying these comics. But the older version, and people in my comments tell me the older version of Carol Danvers, the older version of Ms. Marvel, like all of these older 90s comics, they sold very, very well. And so they have all the marketing research they need. People paid them to give them marketing research on what they wanted and what they didn't want. And yet they don't pick the winners. And it's the exact same thing with Star Wars. Like you said, they've got this entire expanded universe. All you have to do is go, hey, accounting department, which one sold the most? Sweet, make that one. It's a guaranteed winner.
Yeah. And moving on to the Rey movie. So I made a video saying 12 reasons Disney should cancel the DST, the Disney sequel trilogy, and just retcon it and move on. I thought they would, but I vastly underestimated their capacity for stupidity and stubbornness.
It's like they hate money.
That said, before we get into how amazing this Rey movie is going to be, will it actually happen? Because Kathleen Kennedy she must have dirt, by the way. She must have some like locations of bodies or something, because there's no way she keeps her job otherwise. Yes. But she is just on the back of a bunch of failures. So Willow is now dead. It is a dead IP. It's completely gone. They could have done something with it. They could have maybe built it into something. But after that season, nobody would pay $100 for it. It's gone, right? Dead IP. That's on the back of the Boba Fett and the Obi-Wan debacles. Andor was a flop. I know a lot of people like that show. It was a flop. And now we have Mando. The Mandoverse is basically dead as well. Mandalorian season 3 has been a flop, and it has been a commercial shitfest. Just
if they haven't already filmed season 4, I would be shocked if they approve a season 4 at this point.
Yeah, that's 5 big failures in a row. Some calamities in there too, like the complete destruction of the Willow franchise, and Indy 5, which I'm pretty sure. I mean, everyone is in agreement that this thing's probably going to bomb. Indy 5, very expensive movie because they've been doing a ton of reshoots. It's probably going to bomb. That will be 6 big failures in a row. Could even Kathleen Kennedy survive that and get this Rey movie made with that kind of track record of disaster behind her?
So the trouble is, we were hearing rumors that she was on the way out. Like sometime this year, she was on the way out. But then she shows up to the Star Wars celebration and announces these Rey movies. So you're absolutely right. Like, she's got to have the highest form of blackmail. Stuff that I can't even imagine. Stuff that would make the Harvey Weinstein stuff look like child's play. It's got to be, because at a certain point, to me, it's shocking that the shareholders, like the people whose jobs are on the line, somewhere along the line, whose money is on the line, don't step in and say, look, you can't intentionally continue to lose money. I've seen the charts where the first sequel trilogy made $2 billion. Then the next one was like 1.3. Then the last one was like 1. I mean, it is this obvious decline in revenue. I don't understand. I want to say no, she can't make them. I mean, my gut says no, that's not possible. But then until it was announced, if somebody had told me, hey, they're going to make Rey movies, I would think, oh, come on, that's the stupidest thing. Nobody would make a Rey movie. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then they announced it. So the clown show that is Lucasfilm right now, I don't know what they're willing to do or how far they're willing to go. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how much money Indy 5 loses. Was that written by, let's see here, Phoebe Waller-Bridge? Did she write that, or is she just in that?
She is in that. I believe she is going to be the Mary Sue that takes over from Indy.
Yeah. I don't see any writing credits for her, but I know when she's involved in a project, it tends to go that route. But yeah, I mean, at this point, I wanted to believe that no, they would never be able to, they'd never be able to make a Rey movie. But at this point, it just seems like they don't care about the money. I know somebody in the chat said that the money doesn't matter. It's all about the message. And I kind of tend to believe that. I thought months ago when they had an investor call and said subscribers on Disney Plus are down. Rumor is they didn't make hardly. I think they broke even on Wakanda Forever. Reports just came out. They lost hundreds of millions of dollars on Strange World and Lightyear. They're bleeding money left and right. And yet they come out and say, hey, this character that is universally disliked, we're going to make some more movies based on this character. I don't know who's running the show or how many dead body pictures and locations that she has to have. That's got to be the answer.
Yeah. And the other weird thing is, like, just from a pure business perspective, it doesn't make any sense. Just do your research. Look at the Star Wars events, the cons, right? When you go to the cons, the Star Wars, the DST isn't popular. No one wears those outfits. Like, you might see a Rey maybe because it's easy. It's just a stick in a robe, right? So the girl who has to get something together at the last minute, maybe she'll do it, but no one cares. No one goes to those characters. They're not popular. They don't sell. Look at the toy sales. They're pathetic. Yeah. They've lost a lot of money just on the toy sales because no one buys it. I mean, Rose Tico didn't exactly fly off the shelves. If you look at the video games, no one chooses. People don't like playing as Rey. They want to play as the classic characters.
Yeah.
It doesn't sell. No one's interested in it. They went to see those first 3 movies for Han, Luke, and Leia, right? That's what they showed up for. That's not what they got, but it's what they paid for. It's what Disney charged them for before feeding them this garbage. And it's going to be the same thing. Look, I don't think the Rey movie will get made. I think after the Indy 5 debacle, Indy 5 is going to be a disaster. Even if they can't get rid of her, they'll hobble her somehow. They will basically prevent her from being able to turn it into a movie, or they will keep kicking the can down the road and delaying the project and delaying it until they can get her out the door. But I honestly don't think it'll be made. But then again, it's believe it or not, I've been wrong before in my life. So we'll see
it's possible. I could see maybe one of them getting made. If they ever do, and she forces it through, I think they might have won. And honestly, I kind of hope that they do, because I would love to see just how much money they could lose on a Rey movie. I mean, it would make Strange World and Lightyear look like chump change. It would be hilarious, because any Star Wars movie is going to cost $200 million, and it would be lucky to gross production costs, let alone marketing. It would be hilarious.
Those movies, it's not just marketing, because the Star Wars movies come built in with merchandising budget. Mm-hmm. So you have your obviously your P&A costs, marketing, and then the budget of the movie itself. Knowing Kathleen Kennedy and knowing Lucasfilm will probably have reshoots, and then you've got your merchandising budget and your tie-in deals with different companies. It would be an absolute financial calamity. I really hope they make it. I have to say that I hope to God they make it.
I mean, if nothing else, it provides videos for us to make. It's easy stuff. We could talk about it forever, because it's going to be a dumpster fire of a movie. I have no doubt that they will double down on making Rey even more powerful. I know that Kathleen Kennedy has talked about replacing Luke, or the way she talks about Luke Skywalker, like she wants him to kind of get forgotten, and for Rey to be the new central. Like when people think about Star Wars, she wants them to think about Rey. That's never going to happen, but that's the world that she envisions, and the hoops they would jump through, or that she would jump through to try to make that vision come true, would make the worst movie you've ever seen. It would be laughably bad. So a little part of me I want to see it. I want to see just how horrible can they make a movie and still get it into a theater. Yeah.
We're next going to be talking about the Harry Potter franchise, but before we do, Greg, do you just mind interacting with the chat for a minute, because I really need to run to the toilet here?
Yeah.
Just interact with the chat, and after I come back, we'll be talking about Harry Potter.
Absolutely. Man, I'm so glad to see you guys. Guy, I'm glad to see you. I've seen you in the comments before. And Gareth, who's Gareth talking about supporting people? See the terminal list. Gareth talked about the next terminal list, which I did not realize that. I didn't realize that was a book series. And then when I heard they were making another season, I thought, well, I know the first season was successful, but at the end of the first season, it seems like he's pretty much sailing off to accept his death. And I was very surprised that I don't know how they're going to make a second season, but I am interested to see it, because I really did like that first one. I thought Chris Pratt was great. It held my attention the entire time. Like I was ready to hit next episode every single time. Like it was a really, really good show. If you guys haven't seen the terminal list, it's definitely worth your time. Let's see here. So Phantom channels don't cover the new stuff, says Peak Aussie Man. That's the truth. I saw earlier talking about, the Phantoms talk about the expanded universe. They talk about KOTOR. They talk about the originals. Nobody makes videos about the sequel trilogy unless it's to bash it. There is no sequel trilogy fans. Nobody is here for that. And I don't know. I don't know what world these people are living in that made them think, yes, the audience wants more Rey. That's what they want. I don't get it. Guy, you're right. I mean, it's all ESG policies. I guess they're willing to lose a lot of money. It's the amount of money they have to have is astounding, that they're willing to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and I guess don't bat an eye about it. And it makes me realize just how huge that money pile has to be, that they're able to just keep plowing forward like that. Let's see here. Garrett's talking about a bait and switch on Reacher. I like the Reacher shows. I'm actually excited for the next Reacher season to come out. The only thing that the funny thing about that show is how the main character walks. He walks like he's got to go to the bathroom all the time, and it makes me laugh every time. Let's see here. Horror movie renaissance. Nuclear Bomb wants to know. If there is, I won't be a part of it. I am too much of a wuss for horror movies. That's why I did a video about the Marvels coming up, and the director of that made that Candyman movie. I didn't get a chance to watch it because I am too much of a sissy to watch horror movies. I don't like them. I don't like to be scared. It's not my thing at all.
Yeah, I generally just don't watch horror movies out of boredom. I find them to be far too. It's almost like a paint by numbers movie. It's next to impossible to make a truly original horror movie. I did enjoy it. I thought it was good. Psychological horror I like, kind of the Shining type stuff. But
I do like that.
The general slasher stuff, it just bores me.
Yeah.
Retcon, RRTNZ, who I believe contributed $11 early. I meant to thank you for that, RRTNZ. 11 New Zealand dollars, so thank you very much. And he says, Retcon Disney are tanking Star Wars as a tax write-off. Reckon. I don't know, because I don't know anything about tax law in the United States, so I could not tell you. Do you know anything about that, Greg? The possibility that there was also speculation that Willow was so shite because it was just unapologetically, and I know this isn't a word that you like, and it's a word I'm using less, but it was just woke. Okay, you can't use the word woke when it's appropriate. Willow was just unabashedly in your face, fuck you, woke. and I think that might have been a tax write-off where they basically got in the room and thought, right, this doesn't have to make money, so let's just put everything we want in it and just make it the most, just a middle finger to the fans. They were just indulging themselves with that one.
I don't know how the insurance or the write-offs or whatever. I mean, these big corporations, they get write-offs a ton, so I have to imagine they can write it off. But Willow, I didn't even watch it. There's some stuff that I'm like, I want to watch it to see how bad it is, and then other times I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna watch people make videos about how bad it is. And I had more entertainment watching other people talk about it than I think I would have watching the show. But from what I've heard described, it does. It feels like it was vindictive. Like, hey, remember that movie you like? We are going to do the opposite of what you want so hard it almost feels purposeful.
Yeah, that one was grim. All right, so we'll move on to Harry Potter. We'll be talking about Harry Potter now. So first of all, first question, Greg, very important. Were you as shocked as I was that the trans boycott failed for Hogwarts Legacy?
Oh, it could have knocked me over with a feather when the 0.2% of the American population that is trans didn't make an impact on a massive game. I never saw it coming. It was incredible.
The amount of copium they were hoofing when that game was a massive hit. It was just beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
And that was a failed boycott. We're currently in the midst of the boycott of Bud Light, which we can't go into the details of because I hear that the YouTube algorithm has been very busy bombing videos that mention someone whose name rhymes with Schmillen Schmolschmini.
Yeah, you can't. He's protected. He's got plot armor at this point. You can't talk about him. But it's. I really hoped, and I know it's a vain hope, but I had hoped that some of these companies would see the Hogwarts Legacy situation and go, you know what? Everybody was talking about how much they hated this online. Like the online chatter made it seem like nobody was going to buy it. And then the sales were, historically high, through the roof. The only information that I've been able to find was on the WB investor call. And the game was only 2 weeks old at that point, and it had sold 12 million copies. And this is $70 a copy. So you can do the math. And we don't know what it's sold since then. But this thing, it's going gangbusters. And my slim, tiny little fantasy hope is that companies look at that and go, you know what? Maybe the people on Twitter don't actually affect purchasing decisions like we think that they do. Maybe it's just a bunch of people chattering amongst themselves that have no real impact on the economy, and maybe we should just serve the customers and completely forget about what anybody on Twitter has to say. That's my fantasy world, that companies get that message.
Yeah, and just in terms of the game itself, because I don't just want to focus on the actual boycott. I would rather just talk about the game, which is, I think, we should be talking about that because these idiots online, they put in no effort. They just said, oh, boycott this because J.K. Rowling's a transphobe. Just lazy slacktivism, clicktivism. But the people who made the game obviously worked their asses off. They were working on that thing for 3 or 4 years. So I think it's only that we actually discuss that a bit. Now, I haven't played the game.
It's a very high quality game.
You have. So what's it like?
You know what? If you are a big fan of Harry Potter, this game is not like, it's not a super action type game. It's very relaxing. Like, there's a lot of little side stuff to do. There are little, little treasure areas to go find, little puzzles to solve. You're walking around town, and there's shrubbery you can interact with, and magical shears will come up and do it, or you will walk up on a hammer and anvil, and you can interact, and the hammer will start moving. Like, it's all that magical world stuff that you just kind of want to live in. That is what this game is delivering. Nothing. The plot, I don't feel, is like this earth-shattering plot. There is a plot about an evil goblin that's trying to, use some kind of ancient magic or something. But for the most part, you're exploring Hogwarts Castle. You're helping your friends with, things they have to work on. They've got their own quests and aims that they want to work at. You're flying around this beautiful countryside. It's just a very relaxing, joyful game to play. It's not stressful. It's not overly difficult. It's, if you've ever been to the Wizarding World, like in Orlando, Florida or something, and you just want to live in that world, that's what this game is delivering. And I honestly think that's what, like, 95% of the fans, that's what they want. They just want to believe they could live in Hogsmeade for a couple of days. That's what they want, and that's what they get.
Yeah, that was actually, it's interesting that you say that you can just live in this world and just enjoy Hogsmeade and Hogwarts and then the surrounding area and just be part of that. Because one of the reasons, I wanted to briefly touch on this, the reason that the Fantastic Beasts franchise failed. And I thought that one of the main reasons is that it didn't have everyone's favorite character, which was Hogwarts, because Hogwarts is a character in its own right. That was a problem. But also, it was far too preoccupied with the Muggle world. It was happening way too much in the Muggle world, in the real world, and not enough just in the Harry Potter universe, in the magical world. It was quite ironic because when the Fantastic Beast franchise came out, they rebranded the Harry Potter universe as the Wizarding World. But that movie spent so much time out of the Wizarding World and in the Muggle world. It was like, people don't want that. That's not what they're going to show up for. They want what you just mentioned. They want Hogsmeade. They want Hogwarts. They want that magical feeling of being in this magical world. And it just wasn't there in Fantastic Beasts.
No, it wasn't. And even the writing felt lazy. Like, what are we going to call the Muggles in America? I don't know. They don't use magic. We'll call them no mages. Like, you couldn't come up with a better word and that set the tone. And you're absolutely right. I never really thought about why I didn't like that movie. But you're right. There was not a lot of magic. There was a small amount of wand waving, but there was no Diagon Alley. There were no hidden passages where this amazing magical world is hiding under the surface of our world. It's just everywhere. You just can't see it. There was none of that. It was just 1920s America, New York. Well, I've seen a lot of movies about that. I saw Gangs of New York, and that was much better than, Fantastic Beasts. If I want to see that time period, I'll go somewhere else. You're absolutely right. I want the magical world, and they failed to deliver it.
Yeah, and they're aware of this. The last movie, it was a flop. I don't know how badly it bombed. I think there was a lot of merchandising tied in, and that was a disaster for them. They didn't make any money in the merchandising. They lost a lot of money, and they lost a ton on the Fantastic Beasts last movie. So they've just thrown in the towel. They're not going to make the same mistake Lucasfilm has made. They are recognizing the fact that Fantastic Beasts is a dead franchise. No one is interested, and they're going to move on. So that was a good decision on the part of Warner Brothers. Now, the decision they made was that they're going to recast the whole Harry Potter cast and do all 7 books with 7 seasons of television. So they will recast Harry and Hermione and all the rest of them. And we will have 7 seasons of television based on the Harry Potter novels. And I am a fan of Harry Potter. I'm not a big fan or anything. There are other franchises I prefer. Like, I like Dune more. I like Star Wars more. There's other stuff that I prefer. But I do like Harry Potter. And I've read all the books twice. And so I know them very well, and I think that's what you really need. You do need a TV show for each season. So I don't think it's a bad idea, because to really flesh out this world and do it properly, you do need to have a season of television for each book. That said, I'm very dubious that they're going to be able to do this without imposing what I call an intersectional caste system.
They've already talked about it. Yeah. So it's,
I mean, I'm pretty sure Hermione's going to be black because she was black in The Cursed Child, which is apparently some garbage play that J.K. Rowling wrote.
Yeah.
Hermione, I'll be shocked if she's not black. Harry will probably be this relatively the same because they need that brand image. But I would also think another big thing about it will be that it will be the Hermione show. When they do eventually make it, it'll basically be the Hermione show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the direction that they're going to go in.
What
do you think? That they can be faithful, or are they going to pursue all of these race swaps and gender swaps and, have Dumbledore running off the Hogsmeade to see his boyfriend and things like that?
The only thing that gives me any kind of hope is the new WB CEO, David Zaslav. When he took over last year, he cleaned house of this kind of garbage. He canceled the Batgirl movie. He was like, I don't care how much we lose. I'm not even putting that out in theaters or whatever it was going to be on. That he canceled a bunch of stuff. He kind of came through, and I believe there were even some interviews where he was like, we're not going to make this political message stuff because it's not selling. He's a businessman, and he understood we can't sell this. Nobody's buying this. So that gives me a little bit of hope. And I do think that you're right. The only way this is going to be, I have mixed feelings about the show because I think that we're too close to the movies and we're going to have the constant comparison. I think those movies were very well done. And so I think that this is one of those shows that it almost feels like, why are we doing this? We don't really need this. We already had these really great movies. And if the shows don't absolutely nail it, the conversation is going to be, why did you even bother to do this? But I think you're right that having a show is going to be great because anytime you make a movie, obviously you're losing a lot from a book. I mean, it just is what it is. But if you've got a solid, 6 to 8 hours to tell a story, well, yeah, you can get all those cool little details and you can spend more time on some things that are really going to immerse you in that world instead of having to get that plot moving along. So it could be good, but you're absolutely right. I don't know how they're going to avoid, you're telling a story in England, England 25 years ago, it's not the most, it's not a college campus pamphlet. It just isn't. And I don't think that's how Rowling envisioned it. But that's what they're going to do. And I think you're absolutely right. They're going to say, you know what? Hermione didn't get enough of a role last time. She was smarter than those boys and they just didn't listen to her. And we're going to really make sure that the audience knows she's the smart one. And I'm very, I don't want to say pessimistic, but I'm certainly not hopeful that this is going to turn out really well.
Yeah, Snape's going to be an incel terrorist.
Oh, absolutely. Oh yeah, his whole back. Well, I mean, his backstory already is that he's an incel, and they're going to really, they're going to run with that.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see what they do nonetheless. So we're going to move on to MCU Phase 5 here. Before we do, I briefly just want to check in with the chat. So Peak Aussieman has been with us the whole time. Aussieman, thank you very much. I appreciate you staying with us. And let's have a look. The movies were I agree with that, Aussieman. Like, I think the first 4 movies were quite good. And then they hired, what's his name? Do you know the guy who directed the last 4, Greg?
Oh, I do not. I can look it up.
I can't remember his name, but they brought him in. He hasn't done anything since because he kind of made a bollocks of it. But he kind of sucked, and the movies that he adopted were okay. I thought the last one of the 8 was decent. But 5, 6, and 7 all sucked. 5 was awful. David Yates, thank you, Aussie man. David Yates, he kind of messed it up, and the adaptations from there were pretty poor, and they lost the magic a bit. So yeah, they were very bare bones. And Gareth Smith says, how about Doom, Nuclear Bomb? The first movie, I don't know how well the first movie did because it was released during COVID, and it did make its budget back, more than its budget back at the box office, like a lot more. But then once you factor in marketing and all the other costs, apparently it did very well on HBO Max, what is now called Max, because it was released. I don't know
why they decided to do that.
It's god awful. But they released it concurrently on HBO Max and in the theaters. So if it made a lot of money on HBO Max, then they might have profited from it. But bear in mind as well, it's only half a movie. People look at Dune and they don't know what to think of it. Now, I'm a big fan of Dune, and I've read the book a couple of times. I love it. Absolutely love Dune. And I think Dune is a poison chalice. Okay, the book is so dense, and there's so much going on in terms of psychology and religion and history. Like, there's a lot of history in there that you can't really get in a movie without having massive exposition dumps.
No,
It's
and
really
you
hard
also
to do.
you can't accurately say how, like, the Bene Gesserit notice little tiny subtle shifts in
It's
somebody's
very
mood,
difficult to
or, you know,
describe
you
how the
can't
Bene
portray that
Gesserit
on
work.
screen without the narrator telling you, you know, Lady Jessica noticed that his eyebrow moved up a millimeter, and she knew that whatever he was just like. There's no way to portray that on screen,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
like they train their infants by having them stare at a wall and make microscopic movements with a particular part of their body for hours at a time, and they do
Yeah,
this for decades, and they train up their entire body to be able to manipulate the bodies of others with the use of voice, and they can incapacitate a man with by touching him in certain areas with a certain pitch of physical movement. It's very brilliant. Like, that's a really good example, by the way, of Frank Herbert created these witches, the Bene Gesserit, who are incredibly powerful. But that is believable. That's really believable, because this is a group of women who have bred. They've actually have a breeding program to create human beings who are capable of doing all of these things, and then they train them for
yeah,
decades. And they also have this hidden knowledge, and it's not magic. It comes from extremely arduous training of the body and mind at a very detailed level, almost insanely detailed, like a microscopic level of training. And this
yeah.
goes on for decades, and this is why the Bene Gesserit are so powerful, and why people think they're witches. They're not actually witches. They can't perform magic. All of this is due to training and breeding. That's brilliant. Frank Herbert created these really powerful women, and they're still women. Like, for example, one of the things the Bene Gesserit do is that they use honey pot traps. So they'll send a really beautiful young Bene Gesserit to have sex with the Harkonnen, because they want his seed for a specific purpose in their breeding program. Brilliant stuff. Brilliant. Now, that's how you do powerful, strong women. Frank
Yeah.
Herbert knew that. Hollywood, make her big and strong and beat man overhead with big fist.
I was very underwhelmed with the Dune movie. I mean, not just because of how they portrayed Lady Jessica and the Bene Gesserit in general, because, you know, you absolutely nailed it. Like, there's so much depth to that book. Really, people are like, oh, it's a sci-fi book. It's not a sci-fi book. It's this psychological, religious, socio-political thriller with sci-fi window dressing. You know, it's all set in a sci-fi world, but there is all that other. There's politics and religion and all that other stuff. And unfortunately, you know, whether Villeneuve, I don't know if I pronounced that right, you know, whether he just didn't get that or he just thought he couldn't bring it to the screen, I feel like a lot of that depth was really missed. And I also really felt like they went too far with that movie. Like, when I was thinking about where they're going to, you know, how they're going to do it, and like you said, there's so much density that you really can't get it all on screen. I felt like, though, the movie would have been good to end right after the Harkonnen retake the planet. And basically, you would have had some more time for those interpersonal relationships to kind of develop. You know, who's going to betray them? You know, do they trust each other? Does Lady Jessica trust, you know, Gurney and all these other guys? And then basically the climax of the movie could have been, oh, wow, they were betrayed. Look at all the ships are landing. Everything is on fire. And then at the end of the movie is just Paul and Jessica escaping. So, yeah, we know they survived, and then credits. And I feel like that would have been a good spot. But since they tried to pack so much more beyond that, there was less time for all of those other details that make that book such a classic. I mean, anybody could do spaceships and explosions and super assassins, but Dune is remembered above all others because of all of those other things.
Well, that's why I called it a poison chalice, because it just doesn't work as a movie. And I was also kind of underwhelmed with it. I think it was a good movie. It was aesthetically a great achievement. I won't take that away from him, and I think that matters.
It was beautiful.
It looked really good, and it felt real. But he wasn't able to get into the depth of it, and that's why I call it a poison chalice, because this was tried before. David Lynch versions of Dune is really weird. It varies between excellent and terrible. It's a very schizophrenic movie.
There's a lot of memes of that one.
Yeah, but he failed with it as well, and I think he actually shot a 5-hour movie in the studio, just butchered it. But even the 5-hour version, if you ever watch it, the really long director's cut version, has major problems. It's a poison chalice. Nobody you would need to be some sort of genius to do it, and even then, you'd need a massive budget and a TV show.
Yeah, I think you're right. The TV show is really the only solution. There's no chance of you getting that in a theater where it makes sense. You would need 2 or 3 seasons of a full length television show to tell that first book. And I don't know who's going to pay for that. I don't think any studio is going to go, oh, absolutely, we'll put up all the money and all that for you to put this book on. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, it's not. So, moving on to MCU Phase 5. So,
before you do that, about 10 minutes ago, our TNZ threw 5.5 New Zealand dollars at you and called me a non-coked up Matt Walsh. So I appreciate the compliment. He said Matt Walsh is essentially Greg, but played by Nick Cage on coke. He's got a little crazy lately. He got demonetized, and I think that it's because he mentioned the person that we cannot mention. He beat that horse to death, and it's not that I think he's wrong. I just think that he got off on a tangent and he was talking about it almost hourly, and then the hammer came down.
He did give that a great deal of attention. He feels very strongly about that issue, though, about the whole trans issue. And I've done a video on it as well, and I know you've done a video on it. And I'm not going to mince my words. I think it is an utterly evil ideology, and what is happening in the States and even in the UK, they've begun to move away from it. There was a clinic that was closed because hundreds of parents started suing them. So that's basically my opinion of it. And when I bear in mind, I'm not talking about the individuals that are caught up in it. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with those people. I'm sure a lot of them are perfectly good people. They're not evil or anything, but just as an ideology that encourages children to make these irreparable changes to their body, I think that is sinister and wrong.
I agree.
I could go on and on and on about it.
I don't think that that's being too light at all. I think that it's horrifying, and it's ridiculous that you can't say that without risk of getting shut down.
They're going after channels. The quartering, he got a couple of videos nuked, and there's been a bunch recently. It's speculation that Anheuser-Busch are putting YouTube under pressure to attack all of the channels that are mentioned in the topic. So it's like you bring up this topic on your channel and you're walking into a minefield, Yeah. Anyway, so let's move on to MCU Phase 5. So that crash landed with an unexpected flop, which was Ant-Man 3. Have you seen Ant-Man 3, Greg?
I have not.
Yeah, well,
at this point, I don't see MCU movies in the theater at this point. I do have a Disney Plus subscription, and their movies are so underwhelming that I have a lot of kids, so I've got 6 kids, and it cost me over $100 to go see a movie.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been an MCU movie not since No Way Home that I felt warranted that kind of investment. And I've got a Disney Plus membership, and I know they're going to be there in a few months. And so, no, I don't go to the theater for Marvel anymore because they're not worth it.
Yeah. I mean, you said it yourself. You've got 500 kids, so it costs you a small fortune to go to the cinema. And yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I've only got a toddler, so he's still not going to the cinema yet. But right. When he's a little bit older, it'll be and hopefully if I have more kids, it'll like yourself, it'll cost a lot more. So I have to really think about it. But Ant-Man 3 is terrible. Yeah. Ant-Man 3 is a really bad movie. You saw my video on it. It's not believable. It's dumb. It's for some reason. Ant-Man's daughter is now Mary Sue. She's a genius, a super genius. She does the Manhattan Project in her basement. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's stupid. The movie looks hideous. The CGI is just abysmal.
I've seen the screenshots, and it's of MODOK especially. I don't know who thought that was a good idea.
I know. And apparently the companies that Marvel are hiring to do this are under massive amounts of crunch time, massive amounts of pressure. It almost reminds me of that scene from The Simpsons. There's back when The Simpsons was great, there's this scene where they're showing the itchy and scratchy animators, and it's a bunch of guys in an animation studio in Korea, and they've got these American soldiers with rifles at their backs poking them awake. Get back to work. That's basically Marvel CGI now. They've got these guys enslaved in a room working on this utter fucking dreck, like She-Hulk and Ant-Man 3. It's terrible stuff, and it looks god awful. But because Ant-Man 3 exists entirely in the quantum realm, it's like a soup of CGI puke. It's a truly
well, and then you got the final battle scene, and they do the big battle scenes, and they look horrible. All the miniature soldiers and everything that they try to do these big wide pan shots, and they look awful. And then you're talking about the VFX team being overworked. That's what I know. I know the Marvels is going to look terrible because you can't just reshoot a movie with a bunch of CGI. You can get new footage of the actors, but then you have to go to the VFX department and go, okay, everything you worked on, throw that out, because now we have new footage and we need you to add the aura of power and all this other, and every time they want to tweak and they show it to a test audience and the test audience says, yeah, that movie sucked. Now they have to re-edit it. Well, now that's more CGI. Like, so every time they make a change, the VFX team has to stop what they were doing and start on the new change. And that's why you're seeing this VFX look so terrible. And I think the Marvels is going to make Ant-Man look crisp and beautiful with how terrible it's going to look.
Yeah, you've done some videos in the Marvels. You basically predict that we all predict it's going to flop. Of course it's going to flop. But
it's
not only
easy money for sure.
It's going to be absolute garbage. And you've gone into this. You've gone into like the politics of it and the different reasons why it's going to fail. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is going to happen with the Marvels and why it's going to fail?
I think that everybody involved, you've got Teyonah Parris and Brie Larson, and they're both very outspoken politically. We've all seen that speech of Brie Larson at the whatever banquet she was at, talking about I don't need a white man to tell me why a movie failed and it's not made for him, and I want to know what all of these other these other minorities think. And Teyonah Parris is the same way. All of the movies that she's involved in, they're not. I want to make it clear, like, they're not white hating movies or anything. They're just. She was involved in If Beale Street Could Talk and Dear White People. And there were some other ones, and they're, like I said, they're not bashing white people, but they're just like, they're movies about the Black experience. Well, in America, Black people make up a pretty small minority of the population. So if you're pitching directly to them, you have to keep your budget smaller if you want to make any kind of money. And, then you've also got the director, Nia DaCosta, and, all of her movies are hyper political. So I don't see any way that this movie doesn't have current political slogan constantly. We're going to have Me Too references. We're going to have BLM references. We're going to have, the girl boss. We're going to have the girls get it done. The Boys was making fun of that, but they're going to do it for real. They're going to do the girls get it done unironically. It's going to be flooded in this movie, and it's going to be the most eye roll, ridiculous film. And once that information gets out, the audience is running away. And that's the other problem. Like, you brought up earlier that Andor didn't do well, and despite the fact that people said it was a good show. Well, that's because once you've poisoned the well so badly, once people get even a whiff that there might be some kind of politics, they run and they want to wait for the reviews. And Marvel has kind of, they've built that reputation, and, Brie Larson, Captain Marvel, is in it. So people are already wary. And if there is even the slightest hint of any kind of feminist message or racial message, people are not going to show up, and it's going to bomb. I think we're going to see loss numbers that are going to be just astounding for a major studio like this.
Yeah, I agree with that. And honestly, they're making him, they don't want to let this one go. It's like a boxer who is up against a vastly superior opponent. He is taking a serious beating, and he needs to just go back, just throw in the towel, or just go back to his corner when the bell rings and say, I'm not coming out again. I don't need the brain damage. But no, he's going to be like, no, I can do it. And it's like, no, you can't. If you go out there, you're going to get killed. Okay, stop.
Because they have to pay for marketing.
Your losses.
And they haven't started the marketing campaign yet.
We're just going to release this thing on Disney Plus or something. We can't be pouring any more money into this money.
That's what they should do. But, the problem is they backed themselves into a corner. They're going to have to restructure everything, because remember, this was supposed to be released in last fall, and this was supposed to kick off Phase 5, and it was supposed to make this new direction for Marvel, and it was really going to solidify the direction. Everybody said, well, Phase 4 isn't going anywhere, and they were telling us this movie is going to tell us the direction that we're moving forward. It's going to set up the conflict, the major conflict. Well, then it didn't happen, and Ant-Man kicked off Phase 5, and a lot of people rightly felt like, I wouldn't have even known it was a new phase unless you told me. There was nothing different between Wakanda Forever and Ant-Man that told me that we changed phases. That doesn't even mean anything. So now you're going to have Guardians of the Galaxy. You had Ant-Man. You now have the Marvels being behind all of those. So now they have to try to fit that in somehow when it's out of order. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah, it'll be terrible. And so one thing I wanted to talk about today was basically the notion of superhero fatigue, because everybody has an opinion on it. And I wanted to get to the bottom of it. So I have accrued some statistics. So we're basically going to discuss, is it a real thing, or to what, obviously it's real, but to what extent is it affecting the per box office of these movies? So let's just have a look here. I've done some research, and since the year 2000, there have been 233 superhero movies.
Are you serious?
Releases. Yeah,
in 23 years, that's 10 a year.
I counted them. We've also had 20 TV shows. Now, the TV shows, it could go up to 30 if you count the animated stuff. I just counted the live action stuff. And let's take a look at how they've been doing recently. So in 2022, there were 7 big releases. The most successful was Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which made just under $1 billion.
Yeah.
And then Black Panther, Wakanda Forever also made a profit, and so did The Batman. Now, then there were 4 flops. Thor, Love and Thunder, Black Adam, Lightyear, and Morbius. Like, if you count Lightyear as a superhero movie, which it kind of is. Morbius and Lightyear were both bombs. So was Black Adam. Black Adam was a bomb, let's face it. So that's pretty mediocre. And then in 2021, the only really successful one was Spider-Man No Way Home, which made almost $2 billion. But the rest were basically flops. Venom, Let There Be Carnage was a flop. Shang-Chi was a flop. The Eternals was a bomb. So was Black Widow and Suicide Squad. So that's pretty bad. And all of the TV shows have flopped. So since 2021, 2022, up to 2023 now, the first 2 superhero movies have flopped. Shazam 2 and Ant-Man. That bodes pretty badly. Like those are really poor results. If you were to add everything up, you're talking about probably billions of dollars lost.
Yeah.
So the question is this part of a trend? Like, going forward, are we going to continue to see a decline? Or is it more of just a bad movie fatigue? Like, people are happy to go see good movies. You've seen what happened with Spider-Man No Way Home. It was the most successful of the past couple of years because it was actually a good movie and people were having a good time with it. Is it because the movies just suck ass, or is it because people don't want to go and watch the 235th superhero movie?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. Partly it's that it is the 240th movie, but it's the 240th of the same movie. Like, when you hear people talk about The Boys on Amazon, have you seen The Boys on Amazon?
No, it's on the watch list. I haven't got around to it yet.
It's excellent. I mean, it's gory. It's hypersexual. It's like if you have any kind of problem with language, nudity, blood, don't watch this show. It's very graphic. But it's a completely new take. The reason I think people like it is because it's a totally different direction on the superhero genre. The superheroes are narcissistic. They're basically gods walking among people. They do whatever they want, whenever they want. A giant corporation owns them, and they're just their marketing tools. Like, everything about this show and the graphic novel it was based on is so different from every other superhero movie. And I think that's why people like it, because it's a totally new perspective. I don't know if it would work as well if it wasn't quite so graphic. I would like to believe that it is, or that it would, but Amazon has another one, Invincible. It's an animated show, and it's different too. It's a guy who learns he has superpowers, and the show is kind of about him trying to fill that superhero role. There's a little bit of a twist. It's a very good show. I'm looking forward to the next season. But I think that all the superhero movies they're all the same in the end. You know, it's hero has powers. He's got a pretty basic problem to solve. There's a throwaway villain that shows up that has no bearing on the story really, other than to just be an antagonist, so the hero has someone to defeat so that the movie ends on a victory. And it all becomes the same. And I think that's why we're saying there's superhero fatigue. It's the same superhero fatigue. That's why, like, The Dark Knight was this huge hit. because it was kind of a new take on the Batman that we had seen. We had seen Michael Keaton Batman, we had seen the animated series Batman, and then we had this new Christian Bale Batman that sort of took it a different direction, and people wanted that fresh perspective. Yeah. And so I think that's what it is that it's all the same. It's boring.
Yeah. I mean, one of the really, really, probably, I don't know if it was the last really great superhero movie, but certainly Logan is the last great one that I remember.
That's another good one. Yeah, that was a totally new idea. Totally, it's not your typical superhero. It's what happens when they get old. Let's explore that. And people ate it up.
Like, what happens? Usually it's about, well, here's a superhero gaining his powers and becoming more and more and more powerful. And then at the end, they have a giant battle. That was, in the case of Logan, it was the opposite. It was, well, here is a superhero who is losing his powers and he's dying and he's getting weaker and weaker and weaker.
Yeah.
That was they basically reverse engineered it and decided to just do the opposite of what audiences expect, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was excellent. It was like I said, it was a fresh take. It's just, you're exploring a different side of superhero life. Some of the comments is telling me that The Boys is a ripoff of an 80s comic, and it probably is. There's really no new ideas under the sun, but I think in the sea of superhero movies we have right now, The Boys feels extremely fresh because it's different from, like you said, guy gets powers, he gets more powerful, a bad guy shows up because reasons, and then he defeats the bad guy, and then the movie is over. And after a while, it just, I'm tired of it. My wife and my daughter loved Shazam. They didn't agree with my review of it. They don't like that I don't like it. They thought it was fun. My wife loves Zachary Levi, and I think he's hilarious. But once I got over my love of Levi, and the movie had fun parts, but as a whole, I just was bored. It was generic. It was just a generic superhero movie. I mean, you could have changed the suit, you could have changed the actor, and it would have been the same movie. Nothing about it was unique. It was completely forgettable, and that's why people don't like that stuff anymore.
Yeah. So, just moving on from superhero fatigue, let's have a look at The Last of Us. Now, this is the one that I'm really looking forward to talking about this with you, because there's a lot of disagreement on this. Like, we can talk about Ant-Man 3 and we can talk about superhero fatigue, and there's a lot of consensus there. Like, no one's going to tell you that the Ray movie is going to be a smash hit, or the Marvels is going to change the face of cinema. But with The Last of Us, there is a lot of disagreement, even within the sort of the online YouTube community, which I love. I thought that was wonderful. I didn't get a chance to talk about it myself because I was busy doing other things, but I did watch it all, and so I'll just let you take it away before I give my opinion. What did you think of The Last of Us?
I thought it was great. I loved it. I know a lot of people didn't like the pacing of it, but since it's a dramatic kind of heavy story, I liked the fact that it was slow. I liked the fact that we got some quiet to see Pedro Pascal do some acting and see his body language, and we could see how the world reacts to him, how he reacts to the world. As far as video game adaptations, I thought it was one of the best that I've ever seen, but that's partly because I think the game had a really great story to build off of. A lot of games, they don't really have much of a story. I mean, it's a game. It's meant to be played. It's not really meant to ask you deep, meaningful questions. And I thought that The Last of Us did a really good job of, where it was possible, did a good job of not making anybody the good guy or the absolute bad guy. Everybody's struggling to live in this post-apocalyptic hell world and doing the best they can and making the choices that they have in front of them. And I thought it raised interesting questions. I thought it was filmed really well. Like everything other than Bella Ramsey's Ellie, I liked pretty much everything about the show. I thought it was very, very good.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing you said there, that it was post-apocalyptic, because one of the illegitimate criticisms of the show was that there's not enough zombies. This is a zombie thing. Like, no, it's not. It's not. It's not a zombie show necessarily. It's a post-apocalyptic show. It's a big difference.
Yes.
And this isn't supposed to be a guy running around fighting off zombies like The Walking Dead. This is supposed to be the zombie apocalypse happened a long time ago, and there are still zombies, but they're quite small in number now. There's far less of them than there used to be. They even say in the show that most of them have died off. Some of them continue to live for decades, but most of them die within a few weeks. So the apocalypse is over, and now it's post-apocalyptic. So the zombies are supposed to be sparse, and I really love that about the show. I liked that it was sparse and it was post-apocalyptic, and also again, one of the fundamental core messages of the show is that in this world, the zombies aren't the main threat. They're a peripheral threat. The main threat is other humans, people who have they've basically regressed into predators. Humans have regressed into predatory groups. They have returned to this kind of hunter-gatherer organization, society, whereby you can really only trust your own clan, your own tribe, and everyone else you distrust. They've regressed to that, and the main threat now is the slavers and the raiders and these different groups that are competing for political control. And the zombies are also a threat, but like I said, it's a peripheral threat, and that's something different. That's why it didn't make any sense to criticize it for not having enough zombies. It's not supposed to.
Right, and I thought they did a very good job of keeping them. You knew they were there, so they were a threat. But you're absolutely right; it was a peripheral threat, and they did a great job of keeping them on the periphery. I think it was very well done.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that everyone did agree with about the show was that everybody loved episode 3, the prepper and the nester.
Mm-hmm.
So episode 3 was the gay episode, as it's called, online. And I'll refer to the two main characters as the prepper, which is the guy who preps and he's ready for the apocalypse, and then the nester, who comes into his house and makes a nice little nest for himself, just to make it easy to remember. And that's not out of disrespect to the characters. That's just so that people watching the stream know exactly who we're talking about.
Sure.
And I thought that was that episode was okay. I thought it was a little bit dull. I didn't particularly enjoy the characters, and in terms of the political propagandistic elements of it, I actually was seeing something very different from what everybody else was seeing. Their main problem was that it was this is a gay show, and they're trying to trick us into watching gay characters. I agree with you when you said that this isn't a gay love story. This isn't a gay story. It's a love story with gay men, right? Which I agree with. It's not Bros. Okay, if you want to see a gay movie that's LGBTQ all the way, go watch Bros. I watched about a third of it and just got bored. It's a really boring movie.
I'm surprised you even started it. I thought about watching it. I want to do a video about it, but I can't bring myself to watch it.
It's really just crap. Now, the politics of it are, forget about, they're bad. To put that into context for you, there's a scene in which the main character discusses anal sex in front of a pre-adolescent boy stuff. So not a fan of the politics, but all politics aside, it's just boring. It's a boring crap show, and the guy, Billy Eichner, cannot carry a movie.
No, I do not like him at all. I don't like his style of comedy. Ugh.
The guy can maybe do a 5-minute segment on an SNL skit. He can't carry a movie, not even close. Not even close. He just sucks. So he sucks, his movie sucks, and that's a gay story. Okay, that is specifically political homosexualism. What you're getting in The Last of Us isn't. It's. I think that was a love story between two men, but I didn't like some of the political messages that they were sending. One of them, so the prepper who is anti-government, at the start of the movie, I think the quote he says is something like "fuck you, you jackboot motherfuckers, you're not going to get me." And that was beautiful. That was based. That was like, yes, that's the attitude you should have the government. Like, the government comes up to your home in America and says, get on the bus. Your attitude should be, I don't care if it's a zombie apocalypse. The Constitution still exists, and I'm not getting on that bus. That was beautiful. But then later on, they have him, his boyfriend or his husband criticizes him for saying that 9/11 didn't happen, and he's a conspiracy theorist. And the suggestion there is that if you are an anti-government prepper, or if you don't trust the government completely, then you're some sort of crazy conspiracy theorist. That's a horrible man. I completely disagree with that. I think if you don't distrust the government, you're part of the problem. You should distrust the government.
I think if you don't trust the American government, you just don't know anything about American history, because there's stuff that isn't even, it's not conspiracy anymore. There are unclassified documents. To me, it's not a problem I have to deal with it. Just as a quick aside, I don't understand how anybody in America who is black trusts the American government, because it's recorded all of the things that they've done. I mean, they experimented on them at Tuskegee, injected them with syphilis and lied to them, telling them it was a flu shot. And none of that is a conspiracy. That's recorded fact. And it happens all the time.
It was initially invented as a means of reducing the black population, for example.
Yeah. So when people say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, I just think, I don't know, I've just read a little bit of history, and I know that the government they do some stuff. I'm sorry, it's just the truth.
Yeah, it's true. So I like the prepper, the fact that he's very anti-government, but the things that I really disagreed with was at the end. So you've got euthanasia and suicide. These are two very controversial topics. Now, the euthanasia part, I don't agree with euthanasia because I think it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I basically think that if you say euthanasia is okay, you will end up basically the same thing with when we said public homosexuality and pride is fine. They said that was okay, and then that started the slippery slope, and now look where we are. Do you know what I mean? You would see the same thing with euthanasia, whereby they say it's okay, and the next thing, a 70-year-old who doesn't feel so great that day isn't being encouraged by his kids to commit suicide so they can get their inheritance. Right. That's where it ends up. So I disagree with euthanasia fundamentally, but within the context of the show, it's the zombie apocalypse. He's not getting any better, and they're out of medicine. Okay, understandable. What I didn't like was the emotional suicide when his husband then commits suicide because he wants to die with him. I didn't agree with that because I felt like, well, what message is that saying? They're glorifying suicide. They're basically suggesting that it's okay to give up, even though it's the zombie apocalypse and you want to give up. The point is, no, the world needs your skills. Even though you're an old man, you can go out there and you might be able to save one life, right? You might be able to save someone. You might be able to contribute a little bit of something to the world from your skill set. And they justify this by saying, the prepper writes a little note saying, and this was when the episode fell on its face for me. He writes a note saying, I hate the world. I hate people. And I was glad when everyone died. Now he is an evil nihilist. They turned him evil right at the end with his little note. Like a billion children die around the world, and that makes you happy. What kind of a psychopathic, lunatic maniac would write that? So they completely destroyed their own character right at the end. So I didn't agree with the emotional suicide. I didn't agree with the pro-government messaging, and I didn't agree with what they did with that main character at the end. But the gay stuff didn't particularly bother me.
You know, I really didn't pay attention to a lot of that. I was so distracted by, because I saw it late and people were like, oh my God, it's so gay. It's the gayest thing you've ever seen. And so I was on my guard, and the whole time I was waiting for the gayness to happen, which there was a little bit. I mean, obviously they clearly, they're in the bed together, and then he starts going down on them, and they're kissing in another scene. But I didn't feel like it was the most egregious, gay romance I'd ever seen. Like, people acted like they were just naked having sex on screen. That's what I was expecting. So I think I was so worried about that I didn't notice any of those other political things that you were talking about. And you're absolutely right. Bill is not the prepper. He's not the same. At the end, the note is not the same character.
And that doesn't make any sense.
It ties into that idea that you talk about the believability of something that was written by somebody that's not the same character that we saw that entire episode. Didn't write that note. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah. I also justify his suicide.
Yeah, that's just not something he would do. And I know they wanted to go a different direction. And in the video game, obviously, we don't ever meet the Nestor. Did you play the game?
No.
So you never meet him. You only meet the prepper, and he's living in this fortress that he's built. And he mentions that his partner has left, and you're going through the city, you're fighting the zombies, whatever, and then you do find the Nestor. He's hung himself, and he leaves a note and just says, basically, I hate this. I don't like to live in this world. You're not fun. You're constantly, obviously you're worried about your survival. You're an ass. I don't want to live with you. I don't want to live in this crap. And he hangs himself. And people pointed out that was a great scene because you're the player, Joel, and you're kind of on this tipping point of, do I fight for this little girl that is hanging around, or do I just say screw it all and not care? And you see these two characters. One decides, screw it, I don't want to live this way anymore, and hangs himself. The other, the prepper that you're walking along with, he has shut himself off from the world so much that he doesn't appear, he is affected, but he doesn't appear to be that affected by his partner. It's made clear that they're gay in the game, but he just kind of sees him hanging and says, well, idiot, or something. He's wearing a stupid shirt. And you get these two impressions of, this is what happens when you give up, and this is what happens when you harden your heart and you don't care anymore. And you, the player, get to see those two avenues, and it informs why the character Joel decides, you know what, I'm not going to be like either of these two. I'm going to care, and I'm going to move on. And it's very efficient writing, and it does such a better job of getting that point across than the show did. It was a nice episode, but it didn't impact the story as well as it did in the original form of the game.
Yeah. Overall, I think the show was very good. Like I said, I think it varies between excellent and quite poor. For me, the low point was the mall episode with Ellie and her friend running around and they kiss because Ellie's gay because Portia's gay.
Right.
That was a bit much. It was like, oh, for God's sake, guys, really? It's a bit of cliche trope at this stage. But anyway, I thought that episode was really, really just boring. And
Yeah, it did drag.
I hated her little friend character who runs off and joins the Fireflies because I sort of thought, look, it's the end of the world. I know we don't like dictatorships. We don't like military dictatorships. There's a time and a place for democracy. This ain't it. This is a time and a place for order and for basically a military dictatorship to keep everyone safe and to actually establish some sort of control. Like humanity is on the brink of extinction, and you're talking, and you're basically a suffragette. Like, pull your head out of your eye. It was, I wanted to reach in through the screen and strangle her.
Well, and that's that modern writers, she calls the government, oh, they're a bunch of fascists, and that's that term that people love to use online right now. And it was one of those modern political points that got injected into the show, and it made me roll my eyes. What I did like about that episode, I thought the episode drug, it went on too long, but what I really thought they did a great job of was that zombie issue where there was one infected in the mall, and you saw that infected early on in the episode, and then you didn't see it anymore. And that did an amazing job of adding tension to the episode without ever having to show a threat, because you, the audience, knew it was there. And every time they had a quiet moment, I was like, man, when is this thing going to pop out? And it added an extra layer that they didn't have to work that hard for. And I thought that was really, really well done. I still think the episode was too long, but that part of it, that was really well played.
Yeah, and that also, it speaks to how the show handled the zombies correctly. They didn't make the Walking Dead mistake, whereby the zombies are kind of a farce. They're just this gigantic horde that are running everywhere, and they're really easy to kill. And it got to the point of where it was kind of cartoonish and ridiculous, and you got just zombie fatigue. Like, there are too many zombies. Sometimes you're supposed to be afraid of them, but it's hard to be afraid of these zombies and to feel dramatic tension when you see people killing 100 of them through a fence with a stick. It's kind of dumb. Right. But in The Last of Us, the zombies are a real threat, and they're rare. Right? That's the beautiful thing. They're not everywhere all the time. They're a rarity, so you're constantly on your on the edge of your seat thinking, is a zombie going to show up? Probably not, but maybe. And that really helped to build dramatic tension throughout the show.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
very well done.
Yeah, very well done. Let's have a look here. Mario. So I did want to talk about the success of the Mario movie, and I know you want to talk about Puss in Boots. So we'll start with Mario. And I have seen it. I watched it the other day. I thought that it was crap. to not be so verbose about it, I basically thought it was crap, and I'll explain why. It bored me to tears. There's very little story and very little plot there. It is the absolute most basic hero's journey story. So it's a hero's journey. Mario, he's kind of a loser at the start. He's got a struggling business and he's not doing a great job. And then he goes on this hero's journey where he has to, impress the girl and defeat the monster and save his brother. And it's a voyage and return. He enters, he falls down the rabbit hole, and then he comes out of the rabbit hole to the end, and everybody gives him applause. It's just the most basic ABC paint by numbers hero's journey plot with the voyage and return twist, the voyage and return format. So basic, and it's very, very much a children's movie. Like, this isn't like a classic Pixar movie where there's a lot there for adults. There's a lot of jokes and a lot of good dialogue for adults. Like, for example, the Puss in Boots: The Last Wish has a lot of that. Last Wish has a lot of that. This movie doesn't have any of this, and I'll give one example. There's a scene where Bowser eats something, and then, because I don't want to spoil it, if people want to watch it, that's great. And Donkey Kong goes up, and Donkey Kong says, "Ha, he did that." And it's like, I know I just saw it, but it's for children. The dialogue is aimed at pre-adolescent children. The dialogue is super basic. The plot is super basic. And the entire movie is basically just a series of sequences to remind you of the old games. So they have the 2D 80s Mario sequence. Then they have the 3D Mario 64 sequence. And then they have the Mario Kart sequence. And then they have the Rainbow Road sequence. It's essentially just a series of Easter egg nostalgia sandboxes. The characters run around in sandbox 1, and then sandbox 2, and then sandbox 3, and then there's a finale. I was bored to death with the Mario movie, and Just so you know, I'm a big Mario fan. Like, I loved Mario 64. I probably spent thousands of hours playing Mario Kart 64. I like Mario. I love the NES games. I love the Super NES games. I haven't played the recent stuff, but I love the 90s stuff, and the Super NES game is brilliant. I think it was called the Super Famicom in the States in the early 90s. I played that when I was like a little boy. Even played it recently with my wife. We had a great time just playing it together. And man, I didn't like that movie at all.
So I completely agree with you. I think I rated it like a 7. I didn't hate it, but I'm the same. I've been playing these games since 86 or 87 or not 86. Like since Mario 3, you know, the Super Nintendo, the 64, I was playing Galaxy on the Wii. You know, my kids are playing Odyssey on the Switch. So like I've seen all of it. So I got all the references, and there was a lot for me to pick out. Oh, I recognize that. That's cool. That's fun. But about a third of the way into the movie, I looked at my wife. We were both kind of yawning, like, I'm bored. And it was weird because there is so much color and there's so much movement and there is crap happening constantly. And I'm like, how can I be bored with all this stuff happening? And then it dawned on me, you're absolutely right, because there is nothing happening. It is just references, and the dialogue is just there. Like you're 100% right. They go to the Rainbow Road sequence makes no sense. They're just like, hey, we need to take a shortcut. We know one. There's a road and just is there, and we're on it now. And just because they wanted to do a Rainbow Road sequence, like none of it makes any sense. It doesn't act like a shortcut. You're absolutely right. It's just, you know, situation to situation. It's all loosely held together. And I did find myself being bored in a lot of the areas. You know, when I wasn't going, oh, I remember that. That's cool. I remember that from 64 or whatever. That's cool. And then when I wasn't doing that, I was like, I couldn't care less about what's happening on screen. This story most of the time doesn't make sense. And when it does, it's boring.
Yeah. I mean, the Easter eggs were fun for honestly like 5 to 10 minutes. For example, when they did that first 2D Mario sequence, the kind of NES, Super NES reference where he's
sure, that was cool.
Pipes and little, that was cool. But the 50th time, you just like, I can't. That's an Easter egg overdose. I can't take anymore.
Yeah, well, and that's, you know, it's easy to do whenever you're telling like a nostalgia-driven movie. It's so easy to just go, remember this? That's cool, right? And the audience is like, yeah, I do remember it. Do you have something else? You have a story? Nah, we're just gonna remember this. That's not really a story. And I think this movie also fell victim to over-explaining itself. You know, you were talking about the beginning, you know, yeah, he's a failed plumber and they're trying to start this business and they put their life savings into it and his family doesn't like him and they don't support him. And like, that was all unnecessary information. Honestly, I think it would have been better if they didn't explain any of it and he just is a plumber when the movie opens and he finds a magic pipe and they just fall in. I don't need any more than that, because the more you explain it, the more you're creating plot holes and you're creating questions in my mind as the audience as to why anything is happening. When I think if you just skip that and say, look, he's in Mushroom Kingdom and stuff is happening now, I think it would have been easier to accept, because I didn't have all this unnecessary backstory about his dad not supporting him and him dragging his brother down, like all this weird stuff they shoved in the beginning. And the only reason they did that was so, like you said, at the end, they could go back to Brooklyn and everybody goes, hey, you're our heroes. And then suddenly there's growth. But that's only the illusion of growth. It didn't really happen.
Yeah, they also burned through a ton of material. I was wondering where Nintendo and Illumination were going to go with this, because I mistakenly thought this would be a threat to the MCU. This is not a threat to the MCU. The MCU can breathe easy.
No.
Breathe easy. It's not.
It made a ton of money, but it's a flash in the pan.
There is some crossover in terms of target demographic between what Nintendo Illumination are now doing and what Disney Marvel are doing. But basically, no, Marvel, there's a big adult audience there, but for these Nintendo movies, it looks to me like they're aimed at children. It's aimed at the family market. They're going after the family market that Disney have abandoned. So Disney have insisted, they made a decision, instead of making family entertainment, we're going to make political propaganda. We're going to make movies filled with messages that we want people to believe. We want to indoctrinate children with all this crap. That's the decision that they made.
Yeah.
And so they fumbled the ball really badly, and Nintendo decided to just pick it up, and they said, okay, you don't want the family market, we'll take it. So I think Disney need to worry about that. Also, the parks as well. Nintendo Land and Universal. I think it's in Universal. That's going to be much more popular now. And increasingly, if these movies continue to be a very big success, the Nintendo Illumination movies, people are going to want to go to Nintendo Land a lot more than they're going to want to go to Disneyland. And
I was at
I see that
a couple years ago.
Disney
they're
like Strange World, and Lightyear. And I can't imagine Elemental is going to be very good. I think you did a video on it in which you said it's basically just going to be a metaphor for racism.
Yeah, it's not going to be good.
Nintendo were going to crush Disney in that market.
Yeah. They have. Do they have other movies coming up? Did I hear they're doing like a Zelda or Link movie? And are they doing more?
I don't know. A lot of Illumination. I think you're gonna basically the dam has burst. So because the Super Mario Bros. Movie was such a smash hit, now they're going to go into overdrive, and we will start to see a lot more Nintendo movies. But I think this was the canary in the coal mine, and they've got the all clear. Now they're gonna press ahead and start pumping out these Nintendo IPs.
Yeah, and they would be silly not to, because for all of their faults and all of this ridiculous anti-consumer decisions that Nintendo makes, they still have a loyal fan base. And if there was a Zelda movie, people would see it. And I think it's also really important to point out that the Mario movie apparently cost $100 million to make. And the marketing campaign was massive. So I would bet the total cost was like $300 million, because they marketed the crap out of that movie, and it paid off. But you take a look at the profit margin. If assuming they had to spend $300 million to break even, and they're closing in on $1 billion at this point, these Illumination movies are not costing what Marvel movies are costing, and the profit is going to be huge. So if they make a Link Zelda movie, or they make a Kirby movie, or they make a Star Fox movie, they're going to make money. They're going to make hundreds of millions of dollars, and they would be silly not to make those, at least one of each, to prove out that they can. I don't know that a second Mario movie is going to do well, though. That's my big concern. Is I think this one made money because it was novel. It played on the nostalgia. We all got to do the Easter egg hunt. We all got to see the references. But if they don't make a second Mario movie that has a actual story and real jokes that anybody above 10 years old can appreciate, it's gonna burn real bad. They will not see this level of success again just by going, hey, remember this stuff? It's not going to work a second time.
Yeah. This movie, this didn't feel to me like Iron Man 1, because I thought this might be the beginning of a Nintendo cinematic universe. This just felt to me more like a live action remake from Disney, just a gigantic cash in. Now, it's not that bad. Like, Jesus Christ, it's not some Disney abomination remake.
Right.
It's
Mario wasn't black. Nobody was gay. I mean, they did just go for the straight up nostalgia cash grab without ruining it.
Wasn't a boss. Yeah, well, she kind of was, but I mean, she didn't defeat the bad guy in the end. So it's not. That would have been required, and she would have had to save Mario and take all the credit and the glory for herself and put Mario in his place. That's what would happen if it was Disney, but thank God it isn't. But it's not okay, so it's not that bad. But at the same time, it did just feel like a big cash grab to me, like a big let's just throw in all the Easter eggs, all the nostalgia. There's kind of a plot there, very basic, but let's just dump it all into this movie and just make a ton of money. It didn't build anything. Like there's no foundation for a cinematic universe, and right now it's got a Rotten Tomatoes score of like 95%. I have no idea why audiences are giving it such a high score. This movie is in for some serious critical revisionism. People are going to be looking back at this 6 months, a year from now, and thinking, "Wow, that sucked."
It's I think that's it. Your timing is going to vary, but I think you're absolutely correct. I walked out of the theater and thought that was fun, but nothing happened. And I think you're absolutely right. A couple of weeks or months from now, people are going to look back and go, you know what? I really thought I liked it, but it turns out I just liked the references, and that movie actually was not good.
Yeah. The last thing we're going to discuss is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I keep saying witch because I know that you wanted to discuss that, and I watched that, and really good movie. Definitely one of the best movies was that 2022?
I believe it came out on Christmas Day.
Right.
or
So
maybe
that
a month before. I'm not entirely sure. It was kind of a sleeper. Like it was just suddenly there. I don't remember it being marketed heavily.
yeah, but that was fantastic. That was definitely one of the best movies of last year. Not much competition, obviously, but terrific. I really enjoyed it. It
Yeah.
reminded me of those classical animation movies that Disney have given up making so that they can make political propaganda.
Yes.
And it's terrific. Really, really good
Yeah.
movie.
It was excellent. Well, it was like you said, it was a movie made for an entire family. So, yes, it was an animated movie. Yes, it was more on the child side, but there were things that every adult could have enjoyed and did enjoy. I enjoyed the hell out of it. This movie made me cry. I mean, it was emotional, but it was also funny. Like they hit every single point, and they didn't shove a bunch of garbage into it. I mean, it was a success on every level. Something that I hope people take away from this movie was how great the villains were, or antagonists in this movie. There were three of them. You had Jack Horner, you had Death the Wolf, and then you had Goldilocks. And what made these villains so stand out was that the movie had a theme about gratitude, being grateful for what's in front of you, right? Puss is not grateful for his life. He's just kind of abusing them, and he's 9 lives, he doesn't care. And so Death is coming after him because he's not being grateful. Jack Horner wants this wishing star because he's not grateful for all the things he has. And Goldilocks wants to make a wish because she's not grateful for the living with the bears. And so that's the whole theme of the movie. And the villains accentuate, they represent what happens when you are not grateful in whatever path that they are. Death is coming after Puss. Horner ends up, being ruined because of his ungratitude. And then Goldilocks ends up being redeemed. And so the villains are not just there to be defeated. And this has been a big complaint with Marvel for a long time, that the villains are just kind of there to be, because a movie has to have a bad guy. So, hey, there's a bad guy. And these villains weren't just the bad guy. They were opposite of the hero, and they taught lessons by their bad example that the hero was teaching by his good example. And they just reinforced the theme of the movie. And it all worked together so seamlessly. It was beautiful.
The other great thing about those three villains was that they were different archetypes. So, for example, Death he's kind of a villain, but he's more a manifestation of Puss in Boots, deep primal fears.
Yeah, more of an antagonist, less of a villain.
Yeah, more of an antagonist. He's not necessarily a bad guy. He's also a teacher. He's trying to teach Puss in Boots about mortality and to be humble and to accept that he is not immortal and he's not this great hero. He has the same vulnerabilities as everybody else. Yeah. The Goldilocks and the Bears were very charming, and they were very good anti-villains. And then Jack Horner was just a pure villain. He was just big Jack Horner was just a big, evil, greedy villain who wanted what he wanted because he wanted it. So you had three different types of villains with different layers to them, and they all come together beautifully. That was fantastic. That
nothing was
really
wasted.
great.
It was amazing.
Brilliant writing to be able to have these different villains who represent different aspects of villainy. And you compare that to, for example, something like a Disney movie or a Marvel movie where the bad guy is the bad guy because he's the bad guy because we need a bad guy.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Thor 4 from last year. Gore could have been a great villain, could have been this idea of like what happens when gods don't behave the way they're supposed to. They kind of set it up like they were going to have this lesson, but then it was just mind control because of the sword. And then he sacrifices himself, and that's it. He's just there to be a bad guy so that Thor and Lady Thor have something to beat up on. He serves no other purpose. And that's why that was one of the many reasons that movie was so terrible.
Yeah. Before we wrap things up, I just wanted to ask you, what is it like having your channel really explode this year? Because you only had a few hundred subscribers at the start of the year, and now you've got like close to 13,000, I think. What's it like to have done so well so fast?
Honestly, I'm still catching up to it. So my wife writes this stuff down. On January 1st, I had 650. And then right now, I think I'm at 12,000, right? Almost 12,900. And it's weird because I'm not doing a lot of the things that like a larger, like I'm trying to work on a sponsorship. I still make my videos like a day before I post them because I'm still trying to catch up to them. So it's strange because I still feel like an amateur, like I'm doing a lot of amateur things, but the audience is growing. So I'm still catching up to it, but it's exciting. I mean, I obviously when you see the big view numbers, your Best of Woke Awards and stuff, you get 100,000 views on something and you're like, this is great. It motivates you to keep going. So it's awesome.
Yeah, you're doing great. Because I've noticed the difference. I watched a ton of your videos, and the early stuff, really basic. It's kind of you standing in a room, and you can hear your kids in the background. Quite charming actually.
Yeah.
But the more recent stuff is really good, and you've got the graphics and everything, and you've got little skits where you're talking to yourself, and it's good. It's funny, and it's more polished and a bit more professional, and the quality is increasing. Like, my earlier videos were even worse than the quality of yours, and like just in terms of the production value, it was horrific. Like it's actually funny how bad my early stuff was,
right?
But it was beautiful, because it was honest, and that's the main thing. Honesty.
Absolutely. Well,
So,
and there's no instruction manual. You have to learn on the job. You make up your own style as you go, and you just kind of refine it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what people want. They want honesty. They don't want imitation.
Yeah. Well, and you're doing the same thing. You're doing these like what if segments, and you grab clips of the movie and you voice over them and you do like a what if or how it was made or something like that. And I love those. I love those little skits. And they add the humor to it that it's not just talking about a movie, crapping on a movie. It's adding those little bits of levity, and I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, because it is hard to be funny. I mean, that's true. Comedy isn't easy. And it's hard to get genuinely really funny stuff in there. But a lot of I did want to avoid that. A lot of criticism on YouTube, it's just, I fucking hate this woke shit, And I kind of like that. There's a place for that kind of passion. I do appreciate it, but it's just not my style. I like to have a good time. I like to have fun. I like to laugh.
Yeah, me too. Well, I also think that there's a reason. Your channel's taken off. My channel's taken off. I think the reason that we're seeing the success is because it's kind of it's not untapped, but there's fewer people doing this than there are people who, like I hate to call people out. Well, I'm not going to do it. But there are channels that it's just, this all sucks. Everything is terrible. And there's a place for that, but there's also an audience for people that just want to have a good time. And they want to laugh about stuff. They want a little critical reasoning about the movies and stuff. So there's an audience for both sides. And I think that the angry side, that's already got a lot of channels. That's got a lot.
Yeah.
They're serving the audience very, very well. And I don't know that there's a ton of room to get into that, but what we're doing, having a good time, playing around, doing the fake awards, or doing I like the in-depth analysis of the Joker's plan or heist plans and how likely they are, stuff like that. That's fresh, and
yeah,
I think there's a new market for that, and people want that different. They want that difference. They don't just want to be angry all the time. So I think that's why it's being successful right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks very much for giving me your time, Greg, because I know
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. This is my first one. It's awesome.
So, yeah, thank you for coming on. You were a great guest, and yeah, hopefully I'll talk to you again, and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. You as well.
All right, and thank you to everyone in the chat. So, Eduardo Ventura, James Garasa, Ruby. If you comment on the video, I'll reply to your comment. I want to wrap things up here, but thank you, Gareth Smith, everybody, Schneck, who was on here and interacted with us on the chat. Thank you very much. Thanks for staying with us. And Eduardo Ventura wants me to do a review of Cleopatra, which I probably will. So hopefully that'll be a
good luck watching that one.
Yeah, that's gonna be grim. All right, take it easy, man, and have a good day. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, have a good day.